Hello, this is Jolie Luder, Jessica Brummett, Maddie Gross, and Alexis Hagman, and we are going to be discussing the biographical, psychological, and sociological criticisms for the short story A Good Man is Hard to Find by Flannery O'Connor. Biographical criticism is the approach that begins with the simple but central insight that literature is written by actual people and that understanding the author's life can help us readers more thoroughly comprehend their work. Flannery O'Connor was born on March 25, 1925. She was born in Savannah, Georgia. O'Connor was born into the era of the Great Depression. During this time, people turned to religion and God. They turned to religion and God for faith and hope, because during this time period there was a lot of absence of wealth and stability. Flannery O'Connor was raised in a strict Catholic family, and as a teenager her father passed away. This death caused a disturbance in her state of mind, which led to the reason why many of her stories involved violence. The cause of her father's death was lupus. Later on in her own life, she was also diagnosed with this autoimmune disease. O'Connor's writing career was short-lived due to an early death at the age of 39. This death was brought on by her lupus disease. Psychological criticism is an investigation of the creative process of the writers. It is a psychological study of a particular writer, usually knowing how an author's biographical circumstances affected or influenced their motivations and behavior. It is the analysis of fictional characters using the language and methods of psychology. Growing up in Savannah, Georgia was a huge influence on many of the settings in Flannery O'Connor's stories. As stated on page 540, it says that O'Connor's settings were most often in the American South, rural, or urban, and because of this, many of her characters were also Southerners. This Southern influence was made evident in the short story A Good Man is Hard to Find. For example, the family was from Georgia, and their family trip took place through the southern woods of Georgia, on their way to Florida. As recently stated, O'Connor grew up in a strict Catholic environment, and writing stories allowed her to show her personal religious beliefs. Her Catholic beliefs were shown throughout A Good Man is Hard to Find, and she showed her religious beliefs through her spiritual characters such as the grandma. The grandma was shocked into her spiritual awareness by the misfit. She became a praying woman dependent on Jesus right before she was murdered. And this was made very evident in her two quotes, one on page 553 that reads, "Jesus," the old lady cried, "you've got good blood," and another one on page 552 that says, "If you would pray," the old lady said, "Jesus would help you." These two quotes are examples of how her faith persuaded her writing. Flannery O'Connor uses the characters in the short story A Good Man is Hard to Find to portray her inner personal conflicts. She uses the character, the misfit, to show her inner conflict between staying faithful to the Catholic Church and breaking away from the Catholic Church. The misfit in the end did not find Jesus through salvation, but the grandmother did. O'Connor shows her faith through the grandma when she tries to persuade the misfit to believe that Jesus will save him. O'Connor then shows her conflict of breaking away from the church through the event of the misfit killing the grandma. The misfit says, "Jesus shone everything off balance. It was the same case with him as with me, except he hadn't committed any crime, and they could prove I had committed a crime, because they had the paper on me." This quote was stated by the misfit, and it is him rejecting Jesus and calling him a bad man. Sociological criticism is the approach that examines literature in the cultural, economic, and political context in which it is written or received. It explores the relationships between the artist and society. Sometimes it examines the author's society to better understand the author's literacy works. Other times, it may examine the representation of such societal elements within the literature itself. O'Connor used the appearance of her characters to give insight on how important outward appearance was to the community of her surroundings during the time period. O'Connor describes in the short story A Good Man is Hard to Find how the grandmother dressed and presented herself superficially. This related to how important it was to be a well-dressed, proper Southern woman during this time era. There is a quote from the short story A Good Man is Hard to Find that gives detail of the grandmother's insistence on image and appearance, and it reads, "Her collars and cuffs were white organdy trimmed with lace, and at her neckline she had pinned a purple spray of cloth violets containing a sachet. In case of an accident, anyone seeing her dead on the highway would know at once that she was a lady." As O'Connor was growing up, it was very important for her to be involved heavily in the church, and to obey the cultural aspects of the generations before her. Flannery O'Connor showed examples of her respect through the values that culture had to the grandmother, and she also showed the lack of respect that the grandmother's grandchildren had for their origins. In paragraph 16, in the short story A Good Man is Hard to Find, the grandchildren showed their disrespect for their roots by saying things like, "Tennessee is just a hillbilly dumping ground," and "Georgia's a lousy state, too." These quotes represented an aspect of a more modern Southern family. Flannery O'Connor tried to break into a more modern sense of being a part of the new church. She liked the idea of the modern church because it focused less on the roots of the strict behavior. We hope you gained a deeper insight on the biographical, psychological, and sociological criticisms of the short story A Good Man is Hard to Find by Flannery O'Connor. Thank you for watching.